Hey, good morning. Thank you for being here, everybody. Appreciate your coming to this forum. Our purpose today is to go really quickly through updates to the CCB's advertising guidance. The old guidance was more than a year old and was kind of the first out of the gate, attempting to construe and clarify the kind of guardrails around advertising established by the General Assembly. So we have kind of revamped the whole thing from top to bottom, and our goal in doing so, or we have several goals in doing so. One is to make this process as smooth as possible for folks in industry who are going through this kind of unusual system, because we want you to be able to predict how things will go. We don't, it shouldn't be surprising or confusing at any point. You'll find as we go on that the basic guardrails set up by the General Assembly really are fairly straightforward. Where things become challenging is really in relation to the incredible diversity of advertising media that we have today. We wind up often when laws like this are written with statutes that sort of contemplate conventional print and broadcast, and then we have to apply them as an administrative agency at the board to a world where print and broadcast are, one among many, many, many different ways that a business might reach its customers. So things get in the rules themselves, not too complicated. The applications of them to different scenarios really can be, and so our hope today is that we can, by providing this guidance, can give some structure, some predictability to how things are interpreted, how these statutes are applied in different contexts. And in doing that, make sure that they're applied fairly and consistently. It's a competitive market out there. We want to make sure that everybody Okay, sorry about that. I think I lost all of you with our conference room link. So my apologies. I think we're back now. Patrick, can you guys hear me? Yeah. Oh, okay. Yeah, no problem. I think it was something that happened on this end. It's not you guys. So I've just plugged in from the laptop, and we'll just go from there. It'll just take me 1 second to get the presentation up on this computer because it's a different one. Okay, that's a little bit better, and if I have it right, you should all be able to see. Although one of the disadvantages of being on the single machine is that I can't see when people raise their hands. So, Patrick, you would interrupt me when if anybody has anything to say. What I plan to do is walk you through really quickly the new guidance. You can see the structure of it right there, beginning with how we analyze advertising. Pardon me. Carry through what constitutes advertising, distinguishing advertising from art, a couple exemptions in the statute that discuss what is not advertising, section concerning the different unusual contexts that sometimes come up with advertising submissions and understanding how the rules are applied to those. And then a discussion of content requirements, the audience composition requirement, and the familiar mandatory health warning requirement. And then a little bit of talk about process. We've kind of tried to put a lot of thought into making the system go as smoothly as we can make it go. And to that end, we have kind of a streamlined process that ensures first that you have a single point at which submissions can be made, that you know exactly what to expect after a submission is made, and that there's importantly a process to challenge incorrect decisions, any that you disagree with. That process is not really an opportunity to challenge the underlying policies of the General Assembly. If you think those are unwise, we would need the General Assembly to change them. But if you think there's an error in the board's understanding of the facts of the advertisement or how it would appear, or in the application of the law to that particular advertisement, you can apply right back, articulate what that is, and get an independent review pretty quickly. So that's an important feature that I think should improve the fairness of these determinations as well. And again, our goal here really is just smooth and predictable advertising clearances. We don't want this to take a lot of your day, and we want this process to be as efficient on our end as possible as well. So at the beginning of the guidance, which you'll be able to find after today's presentation on our guidance website, is an introduction that explains the sources of the rules. Those are really Chapter 33 in Title 7 and Board Rule 2. And then talks a little bit about analyzing advertising for compliance. That begins with understanding how the law defines advertising. It defines advertising as any written or verbal statement, illustration, or depiction that would reasonably have the effect of inducing sales of cannabis or cannabis products, including any written, printed, graphic, or other material, billboard sign or other outdoor display, or periodical literature publication, or in a radio or television broadcast, the internet, or any other media. So, in terms of sweeping definitions, that one's a bit of a cake taker that, reaches almost every conscious promotional activity that might be communicated to the public in literally any other media. So a very broad definition of what constitutes advertising, which does make it difficult to apply the basic rules about, for example, supplying the health information in contexts where that might not be so easy to do. It's not as simple as putting it at the foot of a print ad or something. So we'll have a chance to talk about that. At each section, I will pause and invite you to ask any questions that you may have so that you don't just have to suffer through me reading the document. And I'll just kind of paraphrase and go quickly through the sections just so that there's understanding of them. And the document, of course, is public and will be available on the site. So don't feel that you've missed anything if something goes by fast. So with that, I guess we'll get right into some of the first challenges that we see that we're hoping to clarify. One is the distinction between art and advertising. The definition of advertising that you see in the statute that's excerpted here is the test for whether something is advertising. And so although artistic expression is often part of advertisement, people sometimes get the idea that they're mutually exclusive categories, and will say, well, it's not an advertisement because it's artistic. That doesn't really change the analysis for legal purposes. We're looking at whether or not the activity would tend to induce sales. So in terms of the big picture, almost everything you need to know in terms of the guardrails I talked about are here in 9 bullets. between the statute in Section 864 and Rule 2.2.11, you wind up with kind of 9 categorical things that just really can't be done in promotional communication, period. And just having those in mind and understanding how they're interpreted takes care of almost all of the content-related questions. And so to the extent that we can iron those out, we should be able to take care of a lot of ambiguity and reduce uncertainty in terms of the advertising copy that you're preparing and the likely approvability of it on this end. So the first and most obvious is that advertising can't appeal to minors or persons under 21. The ways to do that are numerous, and we'll talk about them somewhat in detail. But that's sort of the cardinal rule the General Assembly wanted to see enforced relative to advertising. Advertising can't promote overconsumption. Shouldn't be deceptive, false, or misleading. Can't state, suggest, or imply that cannabis has curative or therapeutic effects. This is in adult use. It can't offer prize, award, or inducement to purchase cannabis or cannabis products. However, sales are allowed. You can have a 50% off sale or something, and that's not an inducement under the statute. The advertising can't offer free samples of cannabis or cannabis products to consumers, can't depict a person under 21 consuming cannabis, and social media promotion is not to talk about products except by linking to your website, where the website, rather than the advertisement itself, talks about products. QR codes are a form of a link. That's perfectly fine. And finally, your advertising communications shouldn't contradict the approved label of the registered product. That includes by contradicting the messaging on the mandatory health warning, which is part of that label. The General Assembly carved out 4 specific kind of safe harbors that are not advertising. Those are the registered product labels themselves. That's not because they're unregulated, but because the product labels are separately regulated, have different requirements, and are addressed through product registration. 2 forms of non-commercial expression. These are important for journalists and third parties talking about cannabis establishments in the industry, but they rarely will apply to the promotional activities of a cannabis establishment itself, because they're kind of oriented toward non-commercial speech, journalism, and that sort of thing. So the first is an editorial, other reading material, such as a news release and periodical publication or newspaper, for which no money or valuable consideration is paid or promised directly or indirectly by the establishment, and that is not within the direction of, written by or at the direction of a licensee. So that's a pretty narrow exemption and applies really just to stuff that you didn't write or control as a cannabis establishment, and so it'll rarely have application to the promotional activities initiated by the cannabis establishment. And just like art sometimes is thought to be a mutually exclusive category to advertising, educational content is not mutually exclusive to advertising, and the existence of educational content or useful information within an advertisement doesn't make it cease to be an advertisement or to fit under this exemption. You're really looking for publications that are genuinely independent of the establishment and its commercial interests. The second of the non-commercial expressive forms that are talked about as an exemption are educational, instructional, and otherwise non-commercial material not intended to induce sales, that doesn't propose an economic transaction, but that merely provides information. Again, here, very narrow in terms of its application to an operating cannabis establishment. Arguably, information about the safe use of a vape or vape battery or something like that might do the trick. But otherwise, I think anything that is in the nature of commercial promotion, which is most all the advertising an establishment would do, is not going to be swept into that particular exemption. Generally, it's for out-of-industry parties. Finally, directional signs. I think the signs and signage, I think, have been a surprisingly hot issue that the advertising statute kind of deals with a little bit messily. But a sign attached to the premises, that is attached to the premises of a cannabis establishment that merely identifies the location, is not going to be treated as advertising. However, sandwich boards and detached signs may be, if they do more than just help somebody who's already looking for your establishment to find it. So that the point, the attachment being an important point in that distinction. And then, so why don't I pause here and just ask anybody who might have, or invite questions from anybody who might have them. Again, I can't see the attendee list, so Patrick, if you could just kind of holler to let. Okay. Whoops.
Yeah, Gabe, could you elaborate a little bit on the term conventional advertising a while back, or discounts or sales? What does that mean? Conventional discounts or sales?
Percent off sales, or anything that might be expressed as a percent off. So, for example, a 2-for-1 sale is really just a percent off sale expressed a different way. So, though discounting and sales are allowed, but kind of grab bag awards where you don't know what you're going to get until you're kind of in a raffle or a wheel spin or something, would seem to be prohibited by the same, and that's what we mean by unconventional, I guess.
Hello, can you hear me?
Yeah.
Super. So back to the one of those 9 bullet points about suggesting that cannabis has a curative or therapeutic effect and that being disallowed. I was just wondering where the line is, because we have a lot of products on the market that are, they're infused with CBN, so they're for sleep. Common strain descriptions are like euphoric or good for pain relief, or again, good for sleep. So I was just wondering where that line was. Thank you.
Thank you for your question. That's an excellent question, and it's so good it actually will receive an entire section of attention a little bit lower down. But it's a good time to pause and just kind of situate the conversation, because it is that area in particular is especially difficult, because the architecture that you and I have kind of grown up with in America comes from the Federal Food, Drug, and Cosmetic Act that governs almost everything in the in the ordinary pharmaceutical and drug space, up to and including supplements. So all those ground rules that exist through federal law that have developed over half a century really are somehow missing from the cannabis space because of the federal status of the cannabis plant. And so it's a very challenging to just kind of be tossed out into space and told, okay, now you're meant to have guardrails around your advertising, but they're somehow different from and less structured than those that we are all used to. Simple examples from the Food, Drug, and Cosmetic law are the prohibition on a manufacturer or purveyor of a drug promoting it other than for approved indications. So there are all kind of drugs in the world that have well-known effects, may be indicated for off-label uses, but under the federal law and regulations that grew up around it, can only be promoted for FDA-approved uses. And that whole system is both very familiar and very refined, because everybody's kicked the tires over decades, and there's really nothing like that in the space that we're in. And so in the section below that we'll get into, we'll try to talk about that in greater detail. So I really appreciate your question, and if it's okay, I'll hold it until we hit that section and then launch into it. And if I haven't covered it in enough detail, just holler.
Excellent. Thank you.
Okay, thanks.
Hi, thank you. I think my question has to do with out-of-state cannabis companies advertising within Vermont publications, and what kind of restrictions we're going to be, if there are going to be restrictions put on those companies within the state, because I've noticed advertisements from out-of-state dispensaries like in New York advertising pricing and sales and quantities and things like that. And I just was curious about that. Thank you.
Also an excellent question, and one that is another real sore spot for this system. I think in the board's view, that kind of cross-state advertising really shouldn't be occurring. However, the board's jurisdiction is over its own licensees, and so what it's doing is approving or denying applications under the Vermont statute by Vermont licensees. We don't have direct jurisdiction over either the out-of-state interests that are buying those ads or the publications. The board can't, for example, fine a newspaper and shouldn't be allowed to for various reasons. But because we don't have that authority, we're in a very odd space when inappropriate cross-border advertising by out-of-state cannabis companies winds up in a Vermont publication. We have nothing to say to the publication. We regulate the cannabis licensees, and we have nothing to say to the purveyor because they're out of state. Typically, what is done is that's called to the attention of the state regulator where the advertising business is situated, but we're left to kind of hope that they'll deal appropriately with it. And that, I think if we're being frank, doesn't always happen. And so that's a significant fairness problem that the board is aware of, and that I think there's a lot of work and attention going into fixing, but there is not a good fix now. Every once in a while, I was at the deli the other day and I'm flipping through a weekly, see this advertisement. I think, how did that get by us? And of course, it didn't. It was from another state. And if I were in this state complying with the considerable advertising restrictions imposed by the General Assembly and complying with the principle that we're not really supposed to be promoting cross-state transit or cannabis commerce, I'd be very angry. I'd be very unhappy that I have my hand tied behind my back because I'm playing by the rules, but somebody in another state might be able to take out advertisements that I couldn't. Unfortunately, that's sort of the position we're in right now, but it's getting serious attention. I'm afraid is the best I can tell you.
Thank you.
Hi, can you hear me?
I can. Hi.
Great. Hi. Can you just talk a little bit more about what is allowed on a sandwich board compared to like the face of a building? And so are you saying that you can't have the word cannabis on a sandwich board, but you can have the word cannabis on a frosted window? Or you can't have a cannabis leaf on a sandwich board, but you can have it on a window?
Name and logo, I think, are always going to be okay. Like the other question that I sort of punted here, we have a kind of subsection that addresses this with more particularity. So if it's okay, I'll hold until that subsection. If I go through it too quickly, can you holler at me then, and we'll back up to it and make sure that your question was answered.
Okay. And I have another one, which is just a little bit more clarity on like when you talk about a product label being okay, like I'm just not quite sure about how that's applied on Instagram, because I have a feeling that it's not allowed on Instagram. So I just want to know a little bit more about what you mean when you talk about product labels being appropriate.
Oh, thank you for clarifying that one. I actually can give some direct clarification too. When the statute talks about the product label, it means the actual product label. The label attached to the product as it appears on the market isn't subject to the advertising regulations. It would be an advertisement if I took a product label and published it to social media along with an invitation to come and buy it at my store. So that would, just because it's a product label doesn't take it out of advertising for that purpose. The statute is talking about literal product labels rather than the republication of them off the product.
Okay, so if we wanted to put a product on Instagram, we'd have to submit it as an ad to get approval.
Yeah, there are two answers to that. Yes, it would be an ad, but it would also be a prohibited form of an ad because of a statute that specifically prohibits the promotion of products on social media. Like the other hot areas, I guess one of the challenges of opening this up to the best questions is that we've kind of getting into the areas that are covered in more detail because they need to be. So we'll hit social media down a little bit below, but it is a particularly fraught area. But do be aware of that statute that prohibits the advertising of cannabis products on social media. That can only be done by a link to your site itself.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, thank you. Okay, any other questions before I launch into the kind of special context that we see a lot, that where we can just kind of offer case by case clarification and maybe have a little discussion? Okay. Okay, thank you, everybody. So I'll launch into the special context that the CCB sees. Many of these we've written about here because they really weren't anticipated clearly when the legislation was developed, or they've created more confusion than we anticipated. So being able to think through these unusual circumstances, they tend to fall into the category of what we're calling unconventional advertising. It can really help everybody understand how this system interacts with the things a business might or just do in the ordinary course of things. The first and one of the most interesting is participation in civic events and business directories. Cannabis business is a business. It's part of the business community, and it should, be an active participant in the business community, including the civic events that the business community supports. Area travel and tourism promotion, for example, and even festivals and the kind of things that area businesses will get together to do. This includes sponsoring civic activities. Sometimes there'll be a concert in the park and it may have 20 sponsors of that concert through a local organization, and a cannabis establishment absolutely can be one of those. It can be a little bit challenging disentangling the benefits that sometimes come with sponsorship, and so this section is meant to help you do that. Along the same lines, business directories, commonly area businesses, or if you're in a plaza with other businesses, will want to publish directories that help people understand what's in the area and get around further toward making the area more friendly to consumers and visitors. You can absolutely participate in those. What we've done here is to provide a 4-part test. If you're trying to kind of answer the difficult question, is what I'm doing sponsorship or participation in a business directory that falls outside of the advertising rules, or is it advertising? Does it do enough to directly promote sales at my establishment that it's really not a sponsorship? So this 4-part test can be applied to bring some fairness and order to this that difficult distinction. So you're looking really at a civic activity or a permissible sponsorship or directory participation if these 4 conditions are met. The cannabis establishment should be one among other businesses. If it's the only one, that's quite a direct promotion of itself. But if it's one of 4 or 5 sponsors of an activity, and everybody sort of has their logo emblazoned on some of the material that is published in relation to the event, then you're in good shape. You're really not advertising so much as participating in that less direct civic activity. You can identify the whatever it is going on in the advertisement or sponsorship should identify the establishment by name, logo, location, hours, and contact information only. This sort of goes to the sandwich board question. Those are sort of the outer bounds of what one can do and say it's either directional or non-promotional. So those elements, name, logo, location, hours, contact information, do not offend the advertising definition or do not bring you within the advertising definition necessarily. And so if your participation in what it brings is limited to that, you could be, the activity could qualify as a civic activity or permitted directory listing and not require the things that go along with advertising. The listing should be accompanied by no offer claim, substantial tagline, or product listing. And the publication should not reasonably be expected to drive foot traffic specifically to the establishment by people other than those that are already looking for a cannabis establishment. Now, this is easier said than done because the sponsorship packages that are often offered by civic organizations that you might help out as a business sometimes are complex, and they'll come with your logo on a banner. They'll come with some print advertising and brochures, and some of them now will come with omni-channel media promotions. And we can't anticipate all of those from here, and so it really is the responsibility of a cannabis establishment to know what it's sort of buying when it gets these things. It won't be uncommon that elements of a civic sponsorship or directory participation will fall outside of the advertising the definition, but others won't. Often that happens when you're offered social media space or posts or promotions in addition to the more common benefits of sponsoring an activity. But we don't want you to be afraid of being a participant in your community. And so if you have questions about that, let us know, and we'll try to make it work to the extent the statute allows. We're into sandwich boards now. So on-premise sandwich boards and detached signs aren't advertising if they're purely directional. Definition is going to be really the same as what you saw in that 4-part test. Name, logo, address, hours, and a directional indicator if you're pointing people to the place. Attached signs, as you remember before, are exempt. They're not treated by the statute as advertising, but detached signs and sandwich boards floating around are. So sandwich boards shouldn't have substantive promotional content such as taglines or information about products, events, discounts. But if they stick to name, logo, address, hours, and how to find the place if you're walking or driving around, then they should be just fine. Foot traffic promotions are an interesting one. It is still advertising because the definition is oriented toward inducing sales. It's still advertising if you have a very clever foot traffic promotion that doesn't, even if it doesn't mention cannabis. If you say, well, I want to drive hundreds of people to my establishment, the reason you're moving them as a retailer near you is that foot traffic means sales by the people that are induced to come visit. So a promotion that may be attractive, even if it doesn't feature cannabis, may still be an advertisement. And then in the summer, especially with summer approaching, event booths and off-premises displays are typical. Somebody may want to have a booth at a farmer's market to, obviously sales are not permitted there, but to orient the community to the business and what it does. Those are advertisements in general. So the circumstances should be sort of quickly described in a submission, and you'll have to do the things that the advertising statute requires of other advertisement. That most prominently, that means the health warning must be available, and the audience composition requirements have to be met. And that can be a real challenge with booths and displays out in the general public, because the general public is composed of folks that are just demographically a little too young to just assume that the audience composition requirement is met. And we'll talk more about that audience composition requirement and how to satisfy it lower down. Our rule, this is 2212C, treats window displays as a form of outdoor advertising. That, is both simplifying and complicating at the same time. It doesn't mean you can't have downstairs windows. I think we've seen a lot of people just kind of throw up their hands and say, we're just, blacking out the windows and we don't want to deal with this. What it does mean, though, is that products and promotional text shouldn't be visible in the window unless the position of the establishment is unique and you can show that that more than 85% or the folks passing by are over 21. So it depends a little bit on the context where the window happens to appear in the world, but be aware that this statute or the rule there does treat a window display as if visible from the outside to people walking by, as though it were any other kind of advertising sign. And then there's merch. A lot of people, have a lot of establishments have beautifully done up logos and merch to go along with it in terms of sweatshirts and hats and other associated branded merchandise that's not cannabis. In general, that stuff, if offered inside the establishment, it's definitionally being offered to people who are over 21. Those are the only people that can get in, and you should be just fine. And so and obviously you're not going to attach the mandatory health warning to a bill of a hat or something. So merchandise in general is not problematic under the advertising statute and is not advertising. However, returning to the kind of 9 commandments about stuff you can't do because it's inherently promotional and expressly prohibited, targeting cannabis branded merch at groups with a promotional purpose may be advertising and is prohibited because those kinds of advertising are prohibited. What we're talking about there specifically is, there's a big difference between sponsoring a street festival for the general public and benefit of the community as a cannabis establishment sponsoring a Little League, for example. There you've got a really targeted group of recipients, and they're exactly the group you're prohibited from those, sort of 9 commandments from going after. And so location and context matter, but in general, merchandise is not an advertisement so long as it isn't doing one of the kind of 9 prohibited things in terms of targeting. So that's hopefully a helpful piece of guidance on that area, which I know can be complicated. I'm going to pause here and put in a plug for the billboard law. Cannabis establishments are businesses like every other business in the state, and the state does have a unique, not perfectly unique, because I think Alaska is in the same camp, and famous prohibition on indiscriminate outdoor advertising called the Vermont Billboard Law. That's in Title 10. It's not in the cannabis chapters, obviously, but be aware of it because it is possible for on-premises signs that comply with CCV rules, nonetheless, to offend the travel and tourism law and the Vermont Billboard Law that apply to everybody. And so we get so deep in the weeds, sometimes we forget that those other statutes apply. And the guidance will give you a direct link there in case you're curious about the content. But factors include square footage and distance from the center line of the highway, et cetera. So I'll pause there again just to take questions before we launch into content requirements. And just before the questions, I want to give you a preview of what we will cover in the coming down. That'll be exactly what all these things mean. What does it mean to be false and misleading, et cetera? We'll address medical related and curative claims. So that's what's coming next. So with that awareness, I'll pause and ask if there are any questions that whether I've confused anybody so far.
So just getting clarity here. A cannabis leaf or the word cannabis on your window is a sign. It's considered an attached, it's part of your structure, your infrastructure. But a product that's viewable from the window is an advertisement. And you can't have cannabis or a cannabis leaf on a sign that's not attached to the building. But you could have a flag or a banner that was attached to a building that said cannabis on it and had a cannabis leaf on it or something like that. That's not advertising.
No, I think the rule treats the window display as if it were any other unattached sign. And then I'm sorry, I lost your other question.
That you can have the word cannabis written on your window or cannabis leaves all over your window, but you can't have it on a sandwich board.
That's essentially true. Although there's not a prohibition on having a cannabis leaf on the sandwich board if it's part of your logo or something. But the statute sort of contemplates one or, premises attached sign that's sort of the sign. And if you kind of have other unattached signs in the landscape, then those individually would be advertisements.
Got it. So in this case, it pays to have the word cannabis or a cannabis leaf in your logo because then you can have it on an unattached sign.
Yes, and I wouldn't go so far as to say you can't have the word cannabis on your sign if it's not in your name. I mean, it's sort of directly what's there. But it is the case that I think the statute contemplated that, and exempted from advertising regulation, the sign that helps people see the business. But I think you would probably be on thinner ice if you took the view, well, I just have multiple attached signs and I've wrapped my building in all this stuff. yeah, I don't know that it would be necessarily prohibited to identify what kind of a business it is, but if you had a offer of sales or a big slogan attached to it or something, that would clearly be on the advertising side of the spectrum.
Okay. So we have a sandwich board outside that says, "Lucky you, cannabis, espresso." That's okay.
Lucky you.
Like,
I mean,
Lucky you's our name. Cannabis is what we sell.
mhm.
Espresso, and then we have, other things that we sell. So is that not allowed? Because cannabis
Yeah.
is not in our name.
So I'd go back. I mean, I think I want to try not to paraphrase too much the sections that we've gone over, because I'll just create confusion. But the thing to avoid here is substantive promotional content, and it talks about substantive taglines. So I think just saying cannabis, that's what's for sale there, I'm not sure is problematic on a sandwich board. But if you get into the more detailed stuff, but in general, the safe space is name, logo, address, hours, and directional indicator or phone number or something is not going to be an advertisement. But if you're going beyond that and sort of saying, well, how much tagline is too much, it becomes, a little bit subjective and messy. So I think that the simplest way to conceive of that stuff is just name, logo, address, hours, and directional indicator. And I guess that does mean that you're going to get to, tout the word cannabis a little bit more if it's in your name, of course. But there's not. I wish there were a bright line about what is substantive, but I'm afraid that's sort of the best we can do at this point. Okay.
Thanks, Gabriel, for doing this. This is very helpful. Question, in the last guidance, there was something that we see as conflicting or just please need some clarification. And that's between social media versus the advertising rules, since there are certain, I would say, exemptions or carve-outs for social media, but specifically on pages 3 and 8 of the last guidance, said that social media accounts may only promote products using links to age-gated websites, images, or text regarding products is otherwise prohibited. But then on page 8, it says social media posts can actually post flower or registered products, but it says that are not calculated to do sales of cannabis or cannabis products. First of all, if we're putting out that, by definition, you are promoting it.
Right.
But how do the two not conflict? Because we're very confused about what we can and cannot do on social media.
Yeah, I appreciate that question, and the messiness of the social media guidance before, as applied to the real world, is one of the primary drivers of what we have now, which is really meant to clarify that. The rule that a product can't be promoted on social media comes from the statute. And I question the accuracy of the old guidance that kind of, to the extent that it suggested that products could be part of posts or something. That doesn't sit very well with this, for exactly the reason that you had pointed out. It's sort of inherently promotional. But you're exactly right, and I hope that the section 1 veil below about online advertising is a little bit less confusing than the past guidance, because the kind of inherent contradictions in those pages hit us too, and that's why we thought we'd better update them.
Thank you. So just to be clear, can we, putting up pictures of product on social media, is that prohibited or is that not?
I think it generally is prohibited if the product is identifiable by brand as something that you can go and purchase as a discrete product. If it's pictures of cannabis flower generally, because they're particularly well developed and demonstrate just sort of the general excellence of what's there, a little bit murkier, but a distinct, this brand pre-roll or, this brand vape cart would clearly be prohibited by the statute and should instead be introduced to the viewer through your website, and you would just have a link on social media.
Okay, and then just to follow up, then you can't say like this product is back in stock either, because it's too specific.
That's how I would understand that statute, Andy.
Okay. Thank you.
And thank you. And I think as you're probably already going through your head, it probably wouldn't be prohibited to say something more general like, new inventory, check our website or something, but to say, a particular brand, particular product, here it is, come get it, would be more directly a problem.
Got it. Thank you very much. Very helpful.
Yes, thank you. And I should acknowledge here, because in light of some of the really excellent questions that have been asked, some of this stuff, no matter how we try, is going to be inherently somewhat subjective. So by articulating what we are now and having everybody in on the conversation, the hope is that we kind of establish a common understanding of, where those lines are. But some of them just, I wish they were more crisp than they are. So the best I can tell you is that we'll try to apply these consistently so that everybody has the same ground rules. I think there's one more hand, and then I should probably launch into the content stuff.
Yes, so I just have two questions. First is, are vendor days allowed? And is posting on social media about vendor days?
Our vendor day, it sort of depends what that means in terms of vendor days, but in general, is a cannabis establishment allowed to feature its vendors or have its vendors there to talk about products? Probably yes. If that's happening outside of the establishment in a conspicuous way, it's probably an advertisement that has to meet the audience composition and health warning requirements and whatnot. But that it's sort of a broad category, so there are sort of ways within it to do it right and wrong, but I don't think there's a categorical prohibition on that of any kind.
Isn't that a foot traffic oriented promotion?
Yes, and they're allowed. The important thing about the foot traffic, I guess, and this is helpful to remember, don't confuse the question, and I do this in my own head, is it advertising with is it permissible? Often you're going to get an answer to is it advertising, for example, with regard to
I'm asking if permissible.
Yes, it's permissible. It's just advertising.
And with approval, but we have to get advertising board approval for any vendor day.
Yeah, if it's outside of the store and it's a conspicuously, attractive display that's meant to get people to come and buy stuff, yes, that's just advertising.
So, if we let people know that there's a vendor day happening, that's considered advertising and needs to be the method by which we alert people about a vendor day has to be approved by the board.
Right. You're absolutely allowed to have vendor days, but the promotions inducing people to come to the store for it with the hope that they'll buy stuff are advertisements.
Not a promotion, just letting people know that there's a vendor day.
That's a distinction without a difference to us.
Okay. So that's one question. And then I guess, what is the CCB's overall goal with this? And what do they think the impact on the market will be when we have out-of-state companies advertising? I'll drop an example in the chat. Things like this.
Josh, if you have any questions about what
but there's a lot.
I'm sorry, I can't see the chat. Okay, well, I'm going to stop here just to make sure that we have time to go through the content requirements. So here we can elaborate a little bit on, those 9 prohibitions, and in specific contexts, it can be hard to know what they mean. So we'll talk first about the prohibition on false and misleading content. That one's pretty simple. Content that might confuse a reader, lead them to believe something that is untrue, can be false or deceptive. Things that are literally true but lead the mind to inferences that are inaccurate and do it on purpose can be misleading, even though they're not a literal falsehood as well. So, but I think most of us understand what those terms mean, but we try there in that paragraph to articulate as clearly as we can what what standard would be applied. And inherently treated as misleading is anything that undermines the health warning. So, an example would be if the advertisement has to have a health warning on it about, cannabis impairing your motor coordination and making you unsuited to drive a car or operate heavy machinery. Advertising that says, come get this, it improves focus, would contradict that message. So those are all examples of matters that could be, or content that could be false or misleading. Obviously, there are an enormous number of ways to do that I won't attempt to list. A really interesting one that I hope everybody will tune in for a little bit is mimicry and intellectual property infringement. The Cannabis Control Board is really interested in your advertising submissions in terms of whether they are deceptive or misleading, and that could lead to a denial of a submission. But lurking in the background is the entire intellectual property law. Many of the popular characters and media images and whatnot that we're all used to are copyrighted. And because the cannabis industry kind of started out in the illicit market, nobody had to worry about intellectual property enforcement. The whole thing was prohibited. And so, the sub kinds of things you shouldn't do were not really of great interest. And as a result, a lot of brands and strain names and whatnot became popular in the legacy market that clearly violate the intellectual property rights of others in the kind of above board commerce. And so it's something to watch out for, not so much because the CCB is going to be shaking our fist at you. We really are only interested if a mimicry or infringement leads somebody to believe a false association with the thing that's being mimicked or infringed. But there are a category of potentially infringing acts that would go right by us. We would say that's okay from an advertising perspective, applying the advertising statute, but nonetheless, that could be a liability to a cannabis establishment. So be aware of those and speak with your business attorney if you have questions about potential infringement. That could happen in advertising. It could happen in label development as well. But many of the folks on this call are probably aware of the kind of guerrilla glue intellectual property litigation over what was really the historical appropriation of that trade name for application to a cannabis strain. But as soon as those businesses became conventional regulated businesses, they also became targets of IP enforcement by the unhappy rights holder there. So be aware of that. Mimicry, not just a problem with us, sometimes won't be a problem with us, but may yet be the kind of thing that you want to talk to your business attorney about if you think that you have potential issue there. Real quickly, charitable claims. Generally, everybody happy to see charitable claims and charitable participation by businesses. If there is conspicuous advertising making assertions that we donate to the American Heart Association or to autism awareness or something, the CCB should be able to verify that it's true that you do donate, and a submission may be rejected if it's so vague that it tends to mislead the reader about the relative generosity or exactly what is being donated to. So not an area we want to micromanage, but if you, as some people do, say, I'm giving 10% of all of my revenue to this good cause, please keep records on site documenting your contributions so that if there's an inspection, compliance and the accuracy of the advertising may be a subpart of that. And so just keep those records around if you're making charitable claims. And of course, the charitable claims should be accurate. Promotion of overconsumption is relatively simple and not something that we see a lot, but advertising that glamorizes kind of overuse or very conspicuous intoxication won't pass muster under that statutory prohibition. So, generally this means, putting the obvious and conspicuous indicia of cannabis intoxication in an attractive or appealing light. Also means, promoting any kind of co-administration with another intoxicant. If you've got a character with an alcohol bottle in one hand or something and a joint in the other, it's hard to say that doesn't promote overconsumption. So that's the sort of thing that might trip that wire. Curative and therapeutic claims are an area, really, I think one of the more contentious areas in this space. We have the law that we have, and it sets up the medical cannabis registry as the appropriate venue for people who want to access cannabis for therapeutic uses. In reality, of course, an enormous number of people do have therapeutic goals in mind or want to experiment with cannabis as a possible solution or mitigator of those. However, just as with the federal food, drug, and cosmetic law, in Vermont's advertising system for cannabis, curative or therapeutic claims are not allowed by adult use establishments. This is a particularly fraught area because there's just a lot of desire to advertise on that basis. So I think this is one of those boundaries against which people stub their toes more than many of the others, and anticipate we may have some questions about it. But really, any suggestion that cannabis is indicated for a particular disease, condition, disorder, et cetera, is problematic from an advertising perspective in adult use. And similarly, coordinating with others, whether it's a medical professional or an influencer or something, to make medical claims with the purpose of driving consumers to purchase cannabis at your establishment is problematic as well. So then the giveaway, prize, award, and inducement prohibition from Section 864B4. This is the sort of, you can't be having, surprise promotions and prizes and whatnot as an inducement to make a purchase at the establishment. So likewise, free samples are prohibited, and that would include free gift cards, but gift cards themselves are perfectly allowable if they're purchased for value. They just can't be given away to, to a lucky winner or something as a way to induce sales. Prices do have to reflect a genuine exchange of value. So I know when the market first opened up, a couple of people said, well, if we get giveaways aren't allowed, so we're just having a penny sale on pre-rolls or something. That won't really pass muster at some, there's some undefined point between a deep discount and a prohibited giveaway. But at the point the value assigned is so trivial it doesn't actually represent an exchange of meaningful value, then you've got to give away at that point. And again, here, a reminder not to confuse what's permissible with what is advertising. A lot of, once you've decided something is advertising, the important thing that brings in is the requirement to have the health information warning and the requirement to target an audience that is appropriately aged. It doesn't mean the thing is prohibited. It just means that it is subject to those unusual requirements. Appealing to people under 21 is simple enough, and you'll see this guidance actually back away from the former guidance, which was, I think, particularly prescriptive about colors and fonts and whatnot, in favor of just reciting the rule as it actually is. Things to look out for often overlap with the intellectual property problems to look out for in terms of using familiar children's characters from popular media. But you get the picture there. The mandatory health warning is, at this point familiar to almost all of us. It is required by statute. The CCB did not write that mandatory health warning unilaterally. It was developed through a fairly complex process. So I know there's a lot of contention about the content itself, and I think that a lot of people think it should be revisited at some point in the near future, but it is what it is for the time being. There it is. We've tried to simplify this guidance in terms of just emphasizing legibility. You are permitted, and this actually differs from the old guidance that said don't mess with the typeface. What we actually found is that telling people not to mess with the typeface can injure the legibility of the thing because it ties the hands of people that are doing graphic design and whatnot. So you can make some changes there, but the important thing is that it's legible to the unaided eye from the same distance the advertising copy is legible. If you've got to, get a magnifying glass to see it, but all the advertising words are visible, it's hard to say that it's there. But there it is. And but you are allowed to change the margins, to stretch it out. Please keep the bolding and whatnot, but it is not necessary to keep the italic type. And so there is some room for people who know what they're doing in graphic design to make the best use of space. Then the audience composition requirements. So once you've decided that something is advertising, the two big items to look for are that the audience composition is acceptable in terms of being at least 85% people over 21, and the health warning. So, and that's why it is consequential what's an advertisement or not.
We talked here about the presumption is that an advertisement to the general public, because the general public is demographically fails the audience composition test, is sort of prohibited until it can be shown, or unless it can be shown, that the audience that's going to encounter that particular advertisement is not representative of the general public, but is older. There are a lot of ways to do that, and some of them are very simple. What we're looking for, and again, we're talking about all kind of media, so the diversity of data is almost infinite, but we're looking for reliable, verifiable, and current audience composition data. By reliable, we mean that it has to be created by a method that could be reproduced. It isn't just a supposition or just a snapshot on a single day. By current, we mean that circumstances haven't changed since it was taken. 10 years ago, the particular passersby on a street in Putney might be quite different than they are today. Credibly derived from empirical analysis, meaning, actual counting and data, not just supposition that, everybody's been to that town and they're, quite old and there aren't a lot of kids there. We do need some objective empirical hook to in order to accept data as demonstrating compliance with the audience composition rule. If you're dealing with most commercial advertising platforms, you'll find, because it sets the market rate of their ads, most of them have excellent data on that subject. So, if you're just in a regular periodical, they can probably help you out right away. When we approve a forum, it goes on a list of pre-approved media, and we assume for a period of years that its audience composition is static unless there's a reason to think otherwise. That's important to those of you who have to work with this system, because if we already have approved the forum, it is not necessary to just go back and get more of the same data to prove the same point that's been proven. So hit that list first if you're looking at a forum. Many of the more popular ones already have been pre-approved, and so you don't have to deal with that piece of things. Finally, online marketing campaigns are sort of a new invention, and one that the statute didn't necessarily contemplate perfectly. And what I mean by that is probably familiar to almost all of you, which is that when we're using the internet, we're not all seeing with the same article the same advertisement. Instead, there's a complex and instantaneous demographic matching market going on in the background to determine what user sees what advertisement. It's a fascinating system, but if you're doing one of these targeted ad buys of online content, we really need to see two things in order to satisfy the audience composition rule. That's validated data that demonstrate that the broker has the technical capacity to estimate accurately the age of its viewers. What that really means is that they're competent at doing it. They have to demonstrate they have the ability to actually drive messages to the kind of recipients that they say. And second is that they're doing it in the particular case of your advertisement, that the campaign is going to convey that to people, and it's sort of been tuned to get adults. Fascinating what can be done. And usually the folks that you're working with, if you're buying this kind of media, have this information right at their fingertips. In fact, because they specialize in targeting, what the CCP wants to know is it's not targeted at kids. So that's how to deal with that particular unusual kind of advertising. Signs and displays also are a form of advertisement, so they're subject to the audience composition requirement. We talked about that a little, so I'll just blow right by it in favor of getting to websites and social media, which is probably the messiest of the areas. Cannabis establishments absolutely can have websites and social media presences. They have to comply with the general advertising requirements. That means a few things that sometimes are left behind. It means substantive content should go through for pre-publication review, and it means the mandatory health warning is there. With regard to an establishment's own website, each site must be age-gated. This is that sort of unusual ritual where one has to see a age gating test where the user is asked just to verify that the user is 21 or older. I think a lot of people are rightly skeptical of anyone who has kids is rightly skeptical that does much. And on the face, that's probably accurate. As a technical matter, though, I think it often does trigger some of the filtering software that is used by parents and schools and whatnot. And so it may not be as useless as it seems. But be that as it may, the age gating is required for each cannabis establishment website, and and it doesn't have to be complicated. It does have to treat each unique visitor with the age gate. That means if you're using persistent cookies that stay on a machine indefinitely once the age gate has been cleared, so that every user of the machine for the next 6 months is going to go right by the age gate, that won't work. You want visit specific age gating, and that probably means no persistent cookies excusing the visit from the gate. You are not required to put the the warning in the age gate, but there's a heck of a lot to recommend it because it makes sure it gets done and you don't have to worry about all your other pages. Whereas, the important thing to us is that each visitor is getting exposed to that thing. How you do that is really your business, but it sure is a simple way to do it, to build it into your age gate. So give that some thought. Social media posts are social media, without question, I think is the most difficult of the media environments to regulate because even the platforms themselves are very inconsistent about their ability to target particular demographics, their ability to do it accurately and to know who's on the platform, and then the rules they apply to the republication or reposting or retweeting or what have you of content. The entire system runs on that, and so a real challenge there. But the most important thing to remember is that if a social media post is promotional and tends to drive sales at your establishment, which most will tend to be, it should be submitted as an advertisement like any other. There are certain things that would be informational and educational in character that don't really go to that, but they're relatively few and far between. I think most of what you're trying to do online is, if you're a retailer, is to drive sales. So there's a total prohibition on using instant messaging platforms to sell cannabis. And the kind of some intermediary marketplaces will actually let the transaction occur on their platform for both legal reasons and regulatory reasons, or for reasons related to federal law and for state regulatory reasons. You do not want to be using any third party to transact finish your transactions. Those have to happen with you. So this, Facebook Marketplace and that kind of thing would be examples that you certainly wouldn't want to be into. So there you have it. Logo and branding on social media is okay and is not inherently advertising. And it is permissible if you've collected with their consent the contact information of consumers so that you can have a text campaign or something, as long as it can be age verified, which hopefully everybody that got in to sign up would be 21. Those are permitted, but they're still advertising. So don't forget, they're not another thing if they're intended to promote sales. So there you have it. And then I'm going to just blast through this because I'm running over time and then take questions so that nobody's forced to stay. We have a submission process that sort of refines how you can interact with the advertising review process so that it's more predictable for you. When advertisement is submitted, the board can require certain disclosures to fix it if something would be misleading without a disclosure. And it can require that changes necessary to protect public health, safety, and welfare be made to the thing. Basically, board can suggest ways to cure problematic submissions, but in the main, you'll submit your advertising copy, ideally at least 15 days before intended publication, to ccb.advertising@vermont.gov. If you could put the submission and your establishment license number in the subject line, that would really help keep order in the background. Attach the actual thing. I think they sometimes encounter very vague descriptions of what somebody's planning, and they can't, it's too vague to really render an approval on. So the more specific you can be, the better. Include the actual media if you can. For spoken media, audio transcript is acceptable as well. Specify the locations where the ad will run, the dates and the proposed dates of publication or broadcast if they're relevant to the audience composition. And if the medium is pre-approved, then you needn't do anything to prove its audience composition is appropriate. If it's not, then depending on what it is, you'll want to go out and get appropriate data to demonstrate that the 15% rule is complied with. You'll hear back within 10 days from the advertising folks. If an ad is approved, that's great, and everybody moves forward. If an ad is not approved, you'll get a clear statement of why in a memorandum. Memorandum will also explain to you how you can seek reconsideration if you think the decision was wrongful or based on an error. So, and we do ask you to please follow the process that's set out in the document you'll get in the memo, and use that process as the way to get those reviews. If we have everybody kind of reach out to anybody who will call back, it does create consistency and fairness problems. Whereas if we have the advertising team manage what was asked, they can make sure that similar questions get the same answer so that we can be fair to you. And so there we have it. And at the very end, we've provided for you a 3-step kind of shortcut to how to analyze a submission to see how it'll do. It walks you through the 9 kind of commandments. So you're going to determine whether you're doing any of those 9 things. If you are, don't get too deep into whether or not it's advertising, because it almost certainly is. There aren't a lot of non-promotional reasons to do those. But then if you're not doing one of the 9 prohibited things, you're going to want to look at the more nuanced questions about whether the thing is advertising. We give you some examples of advertising and not advertising here, and people are astute enough that they've hit on the most subjective and thorny ones. And here we try to compare and contrast those as well. Remember to use that 4-part test that's above if you're looking, trying to determine whether you have a directory listing or a civic sponsorship that is not going to be advertising. And of course, ask if you have, if you're not certain, submit. And we can often give you an answer really quickly. You don't have to wait a long time. If something seems clear, we try to give a clear answer as soon as we can. And we also, as a matter of fairness, try to answer questions in the order that they come in as well. So please use the process because the more orderly and efficient we can make this process, the faster we can clear ads and have you on your way. This, in an ideal world, this process would not take up a lot of your day and a lot of employee hours on the part of a cannabis establishment or on the part of the board staff. So we're mutual interest in making sure that things go smoothly whenever it is possible for them to. And then if you decide that your communication is advertising, obviously the important stuff is the mandatory health warning and the audience composition requirement. So that's the rundown. I apologize for running a little bit over, and I'll be quiet so that people can ask any questions that they may have.
Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Okay, great. Sorry, I had my headphones on. So to piggyback off of Andy's question from before, could we show lifestyle photos of a product in a lifestyle ad? So, for example, a few people in their living room or out in nature somewhere eating one of our consumables or edibles with our package of edibles in the background or something, where you wouldn't necessarily be able to see the logo, but you could see the gummy in their hand, which is, in my mind, similar to like carrying a piece of flour, right? Because it's not necessarily identifiable as our gummy specifically. Is that acceptable? And then another idea would be like just pictures of our gummies posted to social media without any packaging or branding shown, just the gummy itself.
It's hard to know how to apply that statute that says no, shall not feature products. But I think as long as the thing is far enough away and vague enough that you can't identify it as a discrete product for purchase, you're probably okay. But in general, products shouldn't be products in their for sale form or branded shouldn't be in the subject of social media posts, but there is that gray area that you're kind of orbiting around. What if I have people engaged in activity and you can kind of tell that there's a product involved, but not which one. That's a little bit murkier.
But the gummy for, like, let's say we get the packaging out of there completely and it's just like a gummy and it's a friend handing another gummy to a friend or something like that,
Mhm.
They have their hand and they're about to eat it. Is that acceptable?
Yeah, it sounds it. I think it'd be hard to say that that's a discrete product that you'd be promoting. So I can certainly imagine contexts in which that'd be probably okay.
Okay, thank you.
Sure.
Hello, thank you for taking my question.
Sure.
So on the subject of penny pre-rolls, a common type of discount, like I know that we're allowing most conventional discounts, I think the document said, is the buy one, get one. So
Mhm.
just an example here, like if I wanted to say, drop the price of an eighth from $45 to $40, and I say, wait, I own this pre-roll for $5. I'll just take the $5 off of the pre-roll, bundle them together. Am I allowed to advertise that penny pre-roll in that instance? If I'm selling it for a penny, I'm taking the $5 off of the pre-roll instead of the eighth as a bundle. Is that disallowed advertising? Or do I understand that this document regulates just what we can say to the public and not how our discounts are regulated?
A little bit of both, because you're communicating to the public, of course, at the point of sale. But the underlying prohibition is on giveaways, and so I don't think that it could be read as prohibiting product bundling. Or 2-for-1s, for example. If somebody has to buy and they're not getting a free sample, then I think you're okay. But then it would, if you're saying, so you'll get some kind of surprise product from the grab bag if you buy a product, that would offend the prize prohibition. But I don't see any problem with bundling products together. And in general, as long as the amount is not so trivial that it constitutes a giveaway, or for practical purposes be regarded as a giveaway, the board is not going to micromanage the discount choices that you make at your establishment.
Okay, so am I to understand that as long as that there is an exchange of value, that we can say, like, buy an eighth, get a free pre-roll? Because at that point, I'm just taking off the $5.
Yeah, I mean, that's kind of two separate things working next to one another. The prohibition on free product samples, which I don't think that's a problem with, and then the separate but related prohibition on prizes, awards, inducements for purchase. So I think, telling somebody, but if they're bundled together and the purchase is happening and there's a certain value for that purchase, I think you're in good shape. But if you take them apart, you wind up with kind of infinite questions about at what point am I offering a bundled sale versus giving a little prize for a sale that already happened. If that makes any sense. It becomes silly at some point, and I realize that. But the important thing, I think, is to avoid the suggestion that somebody will be entered in or have an opportunity to kind of win something or get something special if they purchase it. And you do make a good point that, what's happening at the point of sale is a little bit different from what we're talking about in terms of regulating advertising and what's said about it to get somebody there.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah.
Hi, I'm Kate Herman. I work for a company called Surfside, and we're actually the #1 digital marketer in the cannabis space across the country. We have pretty strong relationships with different state cannabis boards. And, when I was reviewing your regulations, it seems like it's pretty aligned, very similar to Massachusetts. You don't want to call out specific promos, but maybe saying daily deals is okay. But one of my bigger questions is more so with the disclaimer that you guys have. So in Massachusetts, it's the same exact size, but what they allow is for the disclaimer to either be at the bottom of the ad or on another slide itself, like a GIF. And we can make sure that the timing of that disclaimer stays on longer so people can eligibly be able to see it. My question is more so because of your regulation right now, where it has to be on the ad at all times, there's certain ad sizes that are actually the top performing ad sizes in the space that we wouldn't be able to run. Like, for example, a mobile ad, there's a 320 by 50, which is really pivotal for clients that want to run in-store foot traffic campaigns. You know, as you guys are at Rec, you're trying to really increase that foot traffic and revenue coming in store and brand awareness. The main ad size you want to run would be a 320 by 50 ad size, because that's the top mobile ad placement. But because of how small that ad size is, you're unable to run it. So in Massachusetts, what they do, like I said, they allow it to be on another slide. And as long as we keep the transition, you know, where the disclaimer's on pretty long, like if you guys would consider that possibly down the road, and I'm always happy to provide other documentation of what we do, but especially with our around how long we've been in the industry, we're really strong with making sure everything's within each state's regulations, but also providing our clients with the help we can and with increasing their revenue.
Yeah, Kate, thank you for your question. It's a really, really good one, and it raises an interesting point. You know, the most important thing to us in this guidance isn't to write new regulations. In fact, we shouldn't be doing that. That has to be done through the rulemaking process. It's just to elaborate upon how we're going to enforce the statute. And the statute, with, of course, just calls for the exposure of the consumer to the warning. The kind of rolling advertising or active advertising that you're talking about, you know, can be seen as print advertising where you'd want it on each page, but it can also be seen as a kind of a video. And so I think that one way to solve your problem might be with a kind of 14-second rule that I slid right past. But we did a little bit of experimenting with how long does it take to read that thing. It takes about 14 seconds, depends obviously on the size and ease of reading. But if you have a video presentation and you want to show it, you would be allowed to show the health warning long enough for somebody actually to finish it. And if you do that, you're good. And so I think that some of the advertising content that you're talking about that's an interactive or active that has elements like that, it could be treated under that. You know, give them long enough to read it if it has to be on one slide, or have it on every slide, rather than necessarily saying it has to be on every slide. I think we've said that for like a GIF or something that just rolls without any other order to it. But a more interactive kind of content, you know, you could just treat it as a video and say, okay, as long as this, you know, shows in that text long enough for somebody to actually read it, then you're probably okay.
Yeah, I would say one of the issues, though, having it as video is actually video. Technically, it's a different format. So when we're picking out inventory and we're making sure, obviously, it's inventory that's only going up to, you know, people that are 21 and over, etc. There's the video format. You can't necessarily run that same ad size. So technically, like for a digital ad space that isn't a video campaign and it's structured a completely different way of how you would run it, you'd have to run it as either a PNG, JPG, GIF, or HTML. Video, that would be more of like pre-roll. So we would be bidding on different types of inventory and actually like the ad size, ad space. I definitely understand where you're saying, but on the back end, that kind of becomes a little bit more nuanced because you actually technically are running on different ad size inventory.
Yeah, that's an interesting question. I guess I could encourage you to reach out to Patrick after this seminar, and we could talk in a little bit more detail about the technical aspects of what you're buying and what the choices are for you. But I'll go back to the idea that, you know, the important thing about this guidance is to elaborate upon and make consistent the application of the statute, not to write new ones. And so if you're hitting the fundamental goal of making sure that every viewer of that thing is exposed to that language in a form that it can be read if they wish to read it, then you're probably okay. And we can probably find a way to get you there.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you so much. I appreciate it. And like I said, we do have a way too with GIFs. Like I know you were saying before, like they could transition back and forth, but we could also make sure where it stays at the end on the disclaimer for that long period. So you make sure, I know you were saying they need 14 seconds, but even if you guys came back and you're like, we want 30 seconds to be sure, we could definitely ensure that on our side. Thank you so much for your answer. I really appreciate it.
Yeah, I appreciate your working with us, and happy to learn more about how we can sync things up for you and your clients.
Thank you.
Thanks. This is, you don't necessarily need to like elaborate on an answer to this, but I'm just wondering about maybe putting some language in the social media section about reposting things that consumers have shared, especially if they have photos of the product packaging and things like that on social media, whether or not it's okay to, there's an option to reshare that on your profile. And I'm wondering, where the gray area is there in terms of like that being advertising, though it's not original content you created. So definitely, I know that's like, it's a long conversation. There are a lot of gray areas there. So don't need to go into it right now. Just a thought for like influencers as well, and covering where influencers fall into that.
That's a really excellent question, and I'll have to kind of go fast because it gets into a lot of stuff, but it touches on exactly some of the most difficult stuff about this subject as applied to social media. Cannabis establishment that we license is going to be responsible for the publications it causes and the publications it cooperates with and the publications it itself makes. So I think if you retweet something or republish something, depending on the medium, you have published it. That said, third parties can talk about you all they want, and we don't have much to say about it. The flip side of that is that the use of confederates or agents or friends or relatives or whatnot in a coordinated fashion by an establishment to sort of do for them what they can't do would be attributed in a regulatory sense to the establishment. So if you use a confederate or you purchase, hire an influencer or something to say something that you couldn't say, you would be regarded as having advertised in that manner. Similarly, in the now conventional commercial space that cannabis establishments occupy, everybody does have a legal right to control their trade name and their trademark image and whatnot. And that comes with a duty to control what others do with it. And so it may not be enough to say, well, what could I do? My buddy just started doing that. And, we know that he was, promoting cannabis as a cure for a particular disease, but we didn't do it. It looks like he did. If somebody's using your trademark in a way that you could prevent and you're not preventing it, that could be attributed to the establishment as well. At the same time, we have neither jurisdiction nor the desire to, bring enforcement actions against people because of things third-party people have said. It's just not an area that we police. But you correctly said that this is more complicated than we'll solve right now, but just wanted to give its due to that question and the complexity of it.
Thank you.
Thank you. So in general, we understand that the CCB is following the law. Wondering if it makes sense for the CCB to be more out there in using its limited resources for enforcement, and maybe during the next legislative session, ask the legislature as the regulator to say, does this really make sense for our use of time? That could help us. We are probably the only state. I know there have been other states, but I think right now we're the only state that actually requires the CCB to approve. It does take a lot of time. It does raise the cost and efforts of our business. And as you said, it is competitive, and we understand enforcement is certainly needed over possibly the pre-approval.
Yeah, I think that, that conversation, happened at the inception of the market, and I think is going to continue to. We are a bit of an outlier in the sense that the General Assembly did lean hard into the kind of proactive regulation. I think the attorneys on the call are looking at this thinking this looks very much like a prior restraint system of the kind that courts really disfavor. And so we have to be really careful about how we operate it. We really appreciate your understanding of our role as an executive agency in doing that as faithfully and as in an orderly and consistent way as we can, and joining us in the understanding that if we were left to our own devices, we might have written something a little bit different. You will see some enforcement in this space, though. We have, as the market matures, I think the enforcement eventually has to take the place of education for folks that disregarded, clear boundaries. We're certainly going to take an educational rather than an aggressive approach if there's been genuine misunderstanding or something. But I hear you, and I think that this will be a lively topic of debate in the coming session.
Any help you can bring to it would be great. Thank you.
Thank you.
You hear me now? Okay, sorry. Yeah, I couldn't unmute for some reason. Sorry about that. Anyway, so my question I'm a grower, cultivator. So as a cultivator, I just had a couple kind of yes/no questions about social media posts. Say I'm just posting pictures of my grow process or some kind of technique. Would that be advertising, or is that just kind of not? No approval needed?
I think it would be advertising in the sense that you would need the health information warning, but it wouldn't be prohibited advertising of a product on because it'd be on your site, and it really wouldn't be product specific. You would be, I think that's exactly the kind of content that is acceptable for a licensee's site, but the site itself should be age gated and should have the health information in an appropriate spot.
So this would be on a social, like on, say, Instagram, not on my personal site. Would something like that?
Oh, I see. Yeah, I think the distinction there is that you wouldn't want to talk about a particular product for purchase, such as a particular strain that could be purchased from you. But if you wanted to talk generally about your grow process and the equipment you use and methods, that sort of thing would not be a product itself. And I think that would probably be perfectly fine as long as the other advertising requirements were met.
Okay, and then another one, say in the same kind of picture of a picture of, say, cured finished flower, but not necessarily just here's some finished, kind of pretty flower pictures. Not necessarily promoting them, just kind of, showing, the kind of things I grow.
Yeah, I think as long as probably the same there as there was a similar question, and we kind of came around to as long as it's not a discrete product that can be purchased, or in the case of a cultivator, a product category like a definite strain, and you're just talking about your general operations, and helping consumers to understand them, I think you're probably okay.
Okay, and then if I show, say, that flower in a jar, that would be advertising, because that would be the actual product going to the retailer. Is that? Yeah,
I think images of the product as it's available for sale almost certainly would be on the other side of that.
Okay, and so if I wanted, say I had some product available at a retailer, if I just said so and so is available at so and so, that would be advertising and need approval. Right.
And it couldn't occur on social media if it were specific to the product.
Okay.
It could occur on your website. So you could post on social media, see new products or, look what's new at our site. And then the link could take people to information about the particular products. But the discrete product feature on social media is prohibited by that statute, but permissible on your site.
Okay, great. And just one more kind of for a vendor day, I guess. Say I was going to a retailer, to talk to customers, whatever. If I just wanted to say post it on not my website, but like Instagram or another social media, just say I'll be here for questions and answers or to meet me. But if I don't say, I'll have so and so product available, would that need approval as an advertisement?
It sounds like, yes, the goal of it would be to drive. I mean, you're kind of in a funny space as a cultivator because you're a step removed from the actual sale. So we wind up speculating it's sometimes two. So, most of the answers I've been given are aimed at retailers. At the point at which you're driving sales to, and can reasonably expected that the activity is going to result in you selling more at the cultivation level than you otherwise would. You probably want to think of it as an advertisement, but I think for cultivators rather than retailers, there's a lot more room for the kind of general about us, how do we operate, what are we all about, what are our methods, that would not necessarily be product advertising, and some of it in fact could fit under the kind of objective educational information exemption if it were really pretty if it had a particularly attenuated link to the actual sale, but the contexts are more numerous for cultivators because and the opportunities for kind of non-advertising communications are a little bit more numerous because you're a couple steps away from the sale to the consumer.
Okay, great. Yeah, that really helps. Yeah, it's like kind of, I know a lot of this is probably for the retailer, but I want to make sure, I don't want to cross the line or anything. It helps,
No, I really appreciate that. And it's a good reminder that it's all cannabis establishments. So not just, not just retailers and manufacturers, of course. So thank you for raising that.
Yeah, no problem. Great. Thank you. Thank you for putting this on. Appreciate it.
Sure.
I believe you may have touched upon this. As quick question, quick answer. I think basically we're just curious if we can list like an ad, not for product specific, but go check out, our cannabis products at Winooski Organics or wherever downtown in Burlington. Can we say that, but not be specific about which products? Can we just say our products are now available at these places?
I guess it depends on in what forum. If you're, no, I think actually you're probably okay regardless. You're not talking about a particular product. Then yes, it's an advertisement, but it doesn't sound like it's one that would offend the social media prohibition.
So for example, we only create like edibles, right? So if we were to show a picture of a gummy or a picture of a piece of chocolate, which isn't necessarily proprietary to us, but it says, go check out our products at, this dispensary. And it has, a few images of gummies or chocolate, but we're not being specific about what the branding is or anything like that. Would that be acceptable?
Mm-hmm. I think you could do like your brand and carried by, this or that. As soon as you can attach the image to a particular discrete product, I guess is probably the point at which it becomes problematic in terms of the statute.
But it would be okay if it was flour?
That's kind of hard to answer, but I do think like, the from a distance pictures on a cultivator's, if a cultivator were to post pictures of the general cultivation operation from a distance and, anybody can tell it's cannabis flower, but nobody would associate it with a particular thing that's available for purchase. That's probably okay. Whereas if you have but one product and you have a picture of that product, it's hard to say, well, it's generic, but there again, there's enough gray area that probably could be debated for a while.
Okay. Thank you very much.
Yeah.
Thank you for the whole conversation.
Yes, likewise. Thank you for some great questions. We should probably wrap up pretty soon. I think we're a little bit over time, but I can invite maybe one or two more questions, and then we should probably free you all. Okay. Thank you, everybody, for being here.